It has often crossed my mind how close my life came to an end on a hot summer day in Ferguson, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis, located just east of my hometown of Kinloch. It was the summer of 1944, following my first year of high school. After working that day as a gardener, I found myself being forcibly handcuffed by police officers and violently thrown into the back seat of their patrol car. The sound of the car door slamming behind me was as much humiliating as it was terrifying. I will never forget the look on the faces of those officers, one of them with a more ominous stare than the other, who appeared more empathetic. Both men were white, and Ferguson was an all-white town, which made the situation more intimidating for a young black teenager like me at that time. Welcome to Metro Scene, everyone. I'm Marvin Jackson, and that is from The Introduction of Unstoppable, a recently published memoir of Roy Clay Sr. I had the pleasure of co-writing the book with Roy, and that book is currently the book of the month in December for the Steph Curry Book Club Underrated. Joining me today is the son of Roy Clay, Chris Clay. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thank you, Marvin. Thank you so much for having me. And most importantly, thank you for the fantastic work that you did in co-writing the book. Very much appreciated.
All right, Chris. Well, let's get right to it. How amazing was that for you to know that that book was named the December Book of the Month for the Steph Curry Book Club?
It was amazing. I mean, as you know, we put a lot of effort into the book, and first and foremost, we wanted to make it a good, compelling book. And I think we did that. We checked all the boxes in that regard. So when we reached out to the SC30 team, Steph Curry's team, and suggested the book be included in their book club, they took some time, and we eventually sent them the manuscript. They read it and got back to us, and they said, this is an absolutely perfect fit. And it's a perfect fit because the name of his book club is Underrated. The theme is he, as an athlete, was always overlooked. From high school through college, going into the NBA, he was always overlooked, underrated kind of in terms of his capabilities and what people thought he would be in the NBA. And that's very much the parallel of my father's life story. Roy Clay always wanted to be in the field of science, but for various reasons, a multitude of reasons, he was always underrated or overlooked. So it's an absolutely perfect fit, this book, into the book club.
Why was it important for this book to be written? Why did your family want this book written?
That's a good question. There's a lot. He's accomplished. Our father has accomplished a lot in his lifetime, from his early days in the field of science, teaching math, evolving into the very earliest of computer programmers, into social and political activities, and just a multitude of accomplishments that he's had throughout his lifetime. So one of the big things we wanted to do was we wanted to encapsulate all of that into one content, into one package, that being the book. But then most importantly, we wanted to capture in the book a lot of what is not documented anywhere. So you can Google his name, you can find articles about his different accomplishments. But what's not in any of those articles is what really drove him to do the things that he did. And the big driver for him was family, family, and family. Starting from a very young age, his mother and his father were huge influences on the things that he would go on to do later in life. And then also his focus and his priority was always towards giving back to us as a family, and always prioritizing spending time with us as a family. And we wanted to capture all of that in the book, and we wanted to make it clear to the world that beyond his accomplishments, what drove him was family, and what was most important to him was family.
This book is unstoppable. And, your dad was considered the godfather of Silicon Valley. And I think that's quite a title, too. But, explain to the viewers why he was considered the godfather, because it was more than just him being a great mathematician and computer scientist, but he also brought a lot of folks into Silicon Valley before it was even known as Silicon Valley.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And that's where he got the name. It wasn't what's the right word? It wasn't an ostentatious name that he gave himself or any sort of bragging rights that he tried to accomplish. It really was, one, being a pioneer in the field of programming and what we know as today's modern operating systems. But then two, it was always a priority for him, once he got his foot in the door somewhere else, to bring others into that same organization with him. So to swing that door wide open for other people of color and other overlooked circumstances into his world and into that working environment, just to make sure that other people got the same opportunity that he did.
In Kinloch, which was a small black town in Missouri, actually the first black town in Missouri, and there was I guess a pool hall that your dad worked at as a teenager. And that's when it was discovered that he had this great math ability. And, explain, what happened there, how he became this pool hall worker and what kind of work he was doing there. Because it's so different from what he became. It's
so different, but it's so different from what he became, but it's so him. He was a teenager. He was industrious. He wasn't going to lean on his parents to pay his bills, and he wasn't going to be without income. And you've heard the story in the beginning of the intro, and gardening was no longer on the horizon for him. So with his math skills, he ended up working in the pool hall. He ended up becoming the bookkeeper for the craps game that they played in the back of the pool hall. So he was the bookkeeper, kept track of the winnings and losings in some case, and he used his math brain to do those calculations. And being in a how should I say it, rougher part of town, that was a high stakes job. and errors could possibly come with consequences. Fortunately, he didn't make any errors, and he's still with us today.
Yeah, there are a few scenes in the book that talks about some of those consequences. Right. Let's talk about the fact that your dad, he met your mom, and this is after he became one of the first black students at St. Louis University, where another famous person, Robert Guillaume, was one of his buddies there as one of the first black students there at St. Louis. But then he meets your mom, and that made a big difference in his world too. And then they ended up moving west, which was that when you read this book, that's a great story of how they had to move west to California for him to really continue with his career. Talk about that and what your mom meant to him.
That's a really good point. And it goes back to, one of the key themes that I mentioned earlier in the book, and that we really wanted to capture in the book, was not only his accomplishments, but what drove him to strive for those accomplishments. And I mentioned family was the big thing. And my mom was in terms of our family, our mom really was the heartbeat of our family. She was his inspiration from a very young age. She pushed him, she pushed him to push his boundaries. She pushed him to never settle for rejection, never get discouraged by the things that could come his way in terms of what the world, would bring to especially young black, scientific professionals at the time. A lot of racism, a lot of discrimination. but she was, she was the driving force that helped make him quote unquote unstoppable. And then on the family side, I mean, I mentioned his mother was such a big influence to him and his siblings in terms of pushing them and getting them to strive to accomplish most that they could. Similarly, our mother was like that for all of us, for me and my two other brothers. I mean, she was, as well as my father, of course, but she was really kind of the driving force to inspire all of us, both the kids and as well as my father. There's a funny story, not funny story, but an interesting story in the book. When my father was he had been in HP for a while. He had reached some pretty lofty role. He was the head of research and development. And right around that time, Bill Hewlett, he was doing well in the role. Bill Hewlett said, listen, you're doing well in the role, but we want to move you into a different role. We want you to move into a laboratory role. So they're going to take him from this leading an R&D division to basically being a scientist in a laboratory. So my father went back and told my mother that story without hesitation. She said, Roy, you're better than that. Quit. You're better than that. Quit. So that very next day or shortly thereafter, he resigned from Hewlett Packard and just given and based on the inspiration and based on the motivation that my mother gave and based on the encouragement that my mother gave him to leave that role and to strive for bigger things. And of course, he wanted to do some pretty big things as an entrepreneur in the technology world after he left HP.
He did some wonderful things even before he got to HP. I mean, when he was working at Livermore, unbelievable work he was doing there. I mean, this man was actually going to work in a helicopter sometimes.
That's right.
I mean, those are the kind of things you're going to find in this wonderful story. I definitely, once I met him and heard some of these stories, I was like, I got to help write this book. So I think that you're going to see that once you pick up this book, you're going to have to finish it. Talk about why it's important for people of color and African Americans to tell their stories, Chris.
It's everybody needs inspiration. Everybody needs motivation. As you like to hear great stories from people that are similar to yourself. So for us being African Americans, it's great to hear other African Americans doing fantastic things. And then for non-African Americans, I think it's really important for non-African Americans to see African Americans doing great things, because those sorts of accomplishments are often swept under the rug and not given the widespread recognition that they often deserve. So I think it's important for other people to hear, and it's important for other people to understand that the playing field is level. The playing field is level, and the more people are educated, more people are enlightened as to these things that people of all different cultures are doing, the closer that we can get to, I think, true equality in the country and in the world, for that matter.
How can they get the book?
Easiest way is Amazon. Go to Amazon, search Unstoppable, and it's there, hardback, paperback, and ebook.
That's right. And it'll be in bookstores soon, right?
That's right. Working on getting it in bookstores.
That's right.
That's as we speak, literally.
All right. Unstoppable, Roy Clay Sr. He is the man. Thanks so much, Chris. And it was just a joy working on this book with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marvin, for the interview. And thank you again for the absolutely fantastic work you did in co-writing the book. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks so much. And we'll be right back in a moment.